Okay. Hello. So my name is Katy Bensen. I am the program manager for MoneySense at Opportunities Credit Union. And I do financial education and one-on-one counseling with people for their finances, for housing, everything like that. And so I want to talk today about how you can ease into handling your finances after high school, entering a time where you're going to be having a lot more responsibility and a lot more freedom. And I want to start by introducing this idea of financial wellness. So rather than, thinking of your finances as something that's super restrictive, budgeting as something that's super painful, it can just be, oh, didn't mean to go forward. It can just be, consider how you can have financial wellness. So lower the stress around your money, weather emergencies, and meet whatever goals you may have. So I'm going to start by talking about spending money, budgeting, that kind of thing. We'll talk about borrowing money and credit. And then at the end, how we can pay it back and some information about loans. This is a little bit long. If you guys can just let me know when we get close to the end. And I will try to be speedy. If you have any questions, though, just let me know, and I'm happy to stop for a minute. So, most basic definition of a budget is just how you're spending your money, balancing what's coming in with what's coming out. It is a two-sided equation, right? It's not just about lowering expenses. It can also be how you can increase income. The first most important thing to do if you're looking to start a budget is understand what you're spending, what your earning is, and what's going on. So there are loads of ways you can do this. There's no right way. It's just the one that works for you. I have, really simple ideas on the left. On the right are some apps. With apps, I will say there's a few different things to look for. So there are free apps, obviously, and then there are paid for ones. Free apps typically involve some amount of marketing, which might be fine. You might be able to ignore it, but you should just be aware that what they're marketing to you might not actually be in your best financial interest. Then there's also going to be some apps that connect automatically to your financial institution. And the benefit of that is that you don't really have to do anything. You can just, the information's already there. Or you can input it manually. And so inputting it manually for some people feels more real. It sets, the feeling a little bit more for them. However, and also, there is always like a small amount of risk involved when you're putting your financial information anywhere. So the fewer places you have it, the less chance you have of being, part of a data breach or something like that. But for the most part, we haven't seen a lot of those with regards to budgeting apps. So I have broken down a budget here for a fake person. And so this is probably a little bit different maybe than budgets you guys have seen before, because we've broken into categories based on predictable and monthly, unpredictable, but also monthly. And then these ones that are going to come up, but it's not on a monthly basis. It's on some other time frame. And then these, which, you're not really expecting, but we all could expect, right? Like if you have a car, you're going to pay for car repairs. If you have pets, you're going to have some vet bills. If you have, a body, you're going to end up spending some money at the doctor. And these are things that are really hard to budget for because they're so inconsistent. But so what you can do and what we've done here is just take over the last year, what the average was. So with this, we have all this nice information here, but it's not super useful yet because we have different things. So these guys are monthly. This one is weekly. We have bi-weekly. We have concerts, which is $125 every month, but only in the summer, or, haircuts every 3 months. The reason why I like setting up a budget like this is that you are more likely to track those things that are easy to forget, like haircut, like buying new clothes. Most people don't do those things monthly, but they still count. So once you have this, you can break it down into a budget that has the same time scale for everything. Here I used a month. Some people do by paycheck. That's awesome. Some people might do by week. Also fine. Doesn't really matter what your time frame is as long as you're consistent. So I'm going to ask some questions here. I'm going to ask you all of these questions, and folks online can put in their answers as well. Is there anything on here that kind of surprised you that you think is maybe too high or too low, or you saw it on this side and said, yeah, it makes sense to spend $90 on groceries a week, but then over here it looks, like a lot more when you see that it's 390. So anything surprising to people? Which one? Car repairs? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's based on the previous year of 2000. So 1,000 would be about half of that. It depends on your car, depends on the year. Yeah. Okay. What would you pay first? You don't have to do the five things, but like, what's everyone's priority here? What do you guys think? Mm-hmm. They have roommates. She's roommates. That's the situation. Um, yeah. So, is there anything you guys would cut down you think is high? You said car maintenance seemed high. Mm-hmm. Yep. We have some restaurants here. Gym, cut down on that. Yeah. For me personally, I don't like live music that much, so I probably would cut out the concerts, but that's me. There are two things on here that I want to point out specifically. The first one is the student loan payment. Based on their income, this person would probably qualify for an income-driven repayment plan, so they could get that payment down. And the other one on here that's sneaky is this car insurance. So if for people who are younger, 18, 19, 20, car insurance is going to be really high, right? And it's going to be high. And if you keep the same policy year to year, it's going to stay high. So with this person, this hypothetical person is like 24, 25, hasn't looked at new car insurance in a few years, but could probably qualify for much cheaper car insurance. 223 is really, really high. The other one on here the other thing that they could do is look at refinancing their car is something a lot of people don't think about. Like you guys said, this rent is already super low. And sometimes the question isn't, what can you cut out? What's less important to you? It's just what's the easiest thing you could do? Yeah. So it's like 18 to 20, 23, and then 23 to 26, I think is another bracket. And it's just based on number of accidents. It's the same thing of like young men are charged higher insurance than young women. Um, Insurance companies set their rates and and they are higher for people who are young. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. You can also do things like bundling car insurance and renter's insurance. Sometimes that gets it less expensive as well. Yeah. Let's see. What do you guys think would be the easiest thing to change and maybe the hardest thing to change on this? Someone said getting rid of some of the movie, like the watching TV things, Hulu, Amazon, that kind of thing. That's pretty easy to cancel. Rent, I think, is the hardest thing to change. If you've already got a roommate, there's not a lot you can do. Maybe you can get a third roommate, but it's not going to be easy. Okay. So this is a little bit easier when we have a bigger group, but just kind of a fun, what would you rather do, assuming these things are the same price, right? Live in a city and rely on a bicycle for transportation. So you have higher rent, but no car payment, or live in the suburbs and drive around. This doesn't have to be Burlington, but who would like to live in a city and not have a car? Okay. And who's on team further away, cheaper rent, and you have to drive? Yeah. Okay. Um, who, for the next one, who would rather go out to lunch? Interesting. See a movie in a theater? Yeah. Lunch or a movie. Yeah. It's like $13 either way, right? Yeah. Getting a little more expensive here. New phone or a music festival? What do you guys think? Who's new phone? Okay. Music festival? Okay. Yeah. Sometimes you might have a plan that you're going to the music festival, but you drop your phone in the lake or you put it on top of your car and then drive off and it falls away. And you have to, find something to cut. And then if we look at things over time, adds a little bit more to it as well. Who would rather go out every morning for a coffee or buy a new video game? So this is about $65, either one. What do you guys think? Who's a coffee person? Okay. Who's on video game? Nobody. Okay. Yeah. Oh, cool. Yes. No problem. Okay, great. Okay. Then the next one I think is harder. Would you rather work more, either working a second job or more hours, or not have any pets? Pets are an expense that a lot of people don't consider. Um, I would be on the work extra for pets. What about you guys? Who's on pets? Yeah. Okay. um, And then just the last one of, a gym membership versus delivery and thinking about how often, could you order delivery for the price of a gym membership? I think a gym, yeah, there you go. It's not a lot of delivery for $10. But maybe you have gym memberships that are up in the $80, $90, and it can be a lot more that you might get if you were doing delivery. But this is just to show that it's going to be a different priority for everyone. And it's just about figuring out what you care about and prioritizing those things. So the one thing that we have to consider also is that beyond sort of our regular spending, a lot of people have long-term savings goals. And so these are things like, continuing education, retirement, starting a family, things like that. And with these, it's going to take a long time to save up for them. Once you have them, you use it, you don't need to worry about it anymore. The one that's different on here is this emergency fund, right? For an emergency fund, you want to have a certain amount of money that provides you security or safety. And then once you spend that, which is totally fine to do, a lot of people get stressed out when they have to spend emergency money. But once you spend it, you then rebuild it. So it should be an amount that is kind of always there. And the kind of emergencies we're looking at are things like a car accident, or, what would happen if you lost your job? What would happen if you didn't lose your job, but maybe you got sick and you couldn't work for a couple of weeks? And having the money to support yourself during that time. Rule of thumb that a lot of people use is 3 to 6 months of expenses. I think that's great, a great place to start. For some people, that can be really intimidating because it's high. If you're starting out at the bottom, starting out at nothing, just setting little things to think about, okay, how much could my next vet bill be? Maybe $200, $500. And it doesn't have to be that rule of thumb. It can be whatever makes you feel comfortable. Because what happens when you don't have the money that you need and you try to make a purchase? We have two things. It either goes through or it doesn't go through, right? So this is with a debit card. So it's connected to your bank account. And if the purchase goes through, that means the account has been overdrafted. Essentially, you're borrowing money from your bank or credit union. Or they might reject the purchase, in which case you'll get an alert that says NSF, non-sufficient funds, and you still get charged a fee, which is kind of frustrating. Usually the fees for non-sufficient funds are smaller than overdraft, but both of them could make your account go negative, and going negative is something that a lot of places will also charge a fee for. You could also get charged a fee for starting the day negative or for every time that you have a transaction after you are negative. So having this happen can really create a snowball that's hard to get out of. So really recommend knowing what is in your account, tracking it, and making sure you still have a cushion. In general, planning ahead, shopping around, finding ways to give yourself distance to know what it is that you really want. Marketing and advertising are some of the biggest industries in the world, right? And they're really, really good. And one of the main tactics that advertisers use is like making you feel like you have to make this purchase right now, and having a sense that you won't be able to get it again if you don't buy it right now, or your life will be so much better if you buy it right now. And if you can create distance between, wanting something and actually purchasing it, it lets you be a lot more mindful about your spending and have your spending align much more with your priorities. Yeah. There's pretty much always a holiday sale, whatever it is, President's Day, 4th of July. It can also, be something like noticing in March that your winter boots are wearing out a little bit and looking to buy them in March, April, May, when they might be on sale, instead of waiting until next December, when suddenly you notice that your winter boots are leaking and your feet are freezing and you have to go right then to just buy the first pair of winter boots you can get, right? So planning ahead gives you the ability to be more picky with what you are getting. Okay, I'm not going to grill you guys on this, but just put it out there. Think about where you want to be in 5 years and what it will cost to be there. If this includes education, how are you going to afford it? If you want to live in a particular place, what is the cost of living there? Just those sort of things. Now, with savings, there are a few ways you can get a little bit more out of those. The ones on the left here, the tax advantage accounts, that means that you pay less taxes, right? Either when the money goes in or when the money comes out. The Vermont 529 is a really great one. It is specifically for education. It is through VSAC, and it can transfer through family members for education. This is, what most people's retirement accounts are like. You might see an HSA, health savings account. They're great because, you're not being taxed on it, so you save a little bit of money. The other side is that you are earning some amount of money on the money that you have in these accounts, right? So typically there's kind of a trade-off between accessibility and interest earning. So the more accessible your money is, like a checking account, you're not going to earn any interest on that. High yield savings accounts are pretty accessible, and you can get a pretty good interest rate, especially like right now. You guys might have seen stuff about them. So at OCU, the interest rate on a savings, I don't remember off the top of my head. It's pretty low. We have a CD that is 5%. And so a CD is a certificate of deposit, and it's an account where you put the money in for a certain period of time, and it gains that interest for that period of time. So we'll say a year. So if you leave the money in for a year and you, at the end, you can take it out and you've earned 5% interest on that. However, with a CD, you can access the money before it's ended, but you will not get any of the interest. So that's why it's a little bit less accessible. High yield savings accounts, which I think are really something that's like a bigger financial institution thing. It's not something that like little guys can really afford. Those are going to have interest rates that can change. So it might be 5% this month, and next month it goes down to 3%. There's no guarantee, but you can take your money out whenever you want. The last one here is looking at investing. And investing can have the highest rates of return, but it can also be the least stable, because if you're looking over the long term, right, you're pretty much always going to get a high rate of return. But it might not be that you've earned money exactly when you need it, right? So if you are saving up for something that you want to buy in 6 months or in a year or in 2 years, it's not super safe to store that money in investments. But if you're looking at your retirement fund, that's a great way to do it. So if you don't have money to do to make these purchases, the other thing you can do is use credit. So credit is your ability to borrow money. As someone mentioned before, it is sometimes considered by insurance companies. It is mainly used to decide how likely you are to repay loans. So it's used by lenders, either credit cards or, other lenders, to determine what kind of, loan you're going to be able to get. It is, however, also now looked at by some landlords and some employers. I have seen this come up a lot for people who are young, who have not had loans before and maybe have been told or have this idea that they don't want to go into debt. And so they end up not having any loans, not having any credit history. And then a friend of mine, this happened to, she moved to Chicago and everyone checked her credit report and she had nothing on there. They had no history for her. And so it might not be a problem here. You might be able to rent from a person and it doesn't matter. But it is more than just lenders who care about your credit score. Yeah, that's a good way to start building history. It doesn't, lenders know about that. So they're not just going off of your credit score, they're going off of the credit report as well. And so they might look at it and see, oh, well, this obviously like actually isn't this 19-year-old's card that has been open for 10 years. We know that. But it might help them, start to build their own credit from there. It's a nice first step, but it's not the only thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how they calculate it for insurance reasons, but yeah, in general, I think that adding children on as authorized users is a really good way to start building some credit history, even if they don't get the card. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You could add him as an authorized user. Mm-hmm. And so, mm-hmm. To get a loan, to have one by yourself, you have to be 18. You can't sign a legal agreement before you're 18. Yeah, but you can add them to your card. Yeah. One thing with authorized users is that card has to be maintained well. It doesn't help if there are missed payments or if the balance is high or anything like that. So with credit scores, what they look at is less the exact number and more where it falls in a range. Each lender is going to have a slightly different range that they use for kind of the grade, if you will. So on this one, for example, they're saying, 800 and above, that's going to be the best interest rate. For OCU, where I work, it's 760 and above is all the same. Different places are going to have different requirements. But I show this because a lot of times people get really hung up on the exact number, and that's not really important. It's just where you're falling in the range for that lender. Yes and no. For private student loans, absolutely. For if your score is exactly 700, so if you were going, maybe, depends on the lender. Yeah, I would say that like I see 720 to 760 as like usually the cutoff for like that highest rate. But it does, it does vary. It's hard to know. The other thing to consider is that you don't just like exist with a credit score. Your credit score is generated every time you apply for a loan. And it depends on what credit bureau they're accessing the information from and what scoring model they're using. So you can check your credit report by going to annualcreditreport.com. This is the best one. It's free. It's guaranteed by the government. It used to be that you could only check once a year. Since beginning of the pandemic, they switched to once a week, and they haven't changed that. So that's kind of cool. Some lenders, some credit cards offer credit score, credit report monitoring. And then there are apps. I'm sure people have heard of like Credit Karma, Credit Sesame, those sort of things. And I think that they can be really helpful. However, they might show you a number that's not going to be the same number that your lender sees. And people can get upset when they expect to see something and it's not there. So just know that there's going to be some fluctuation depending on who's pulling it and when. Fortunately, pretty much the same things are important. Most important thing is that your payments are on time. If you have revolving debt, so that's like a credit card, that the balance is low on there, it helps to have a long credit history. It helps to have some different types of loans, and it can be harmful if you're applying for a lot of loans around the same time. And in some ways, I think that like working on a credit score can feel a little bit like playing a game. But when you think about it from a lender's perspective, I think it makes it a lot easier because you consider, if I've lent money to someone 3 or 4 times in the past and they always paid me back right away, I'd probably lend them money again. If someone asked to borrow money from me and the past couple times that I had lent money to them, they never paid me back, I'm probably not going to want to, right? If someone just asked me for money, I might lend it to them. If they came in and asked every single person sitting here for money, I probably wouldn't. So if you can kind of keep that perspective, it is helpful. Yeah. No. Yes. Yeah. That is pretty much what happens. There are some things, there is credit counseling, and credit counseling is usually for managing debt. And those programs can be really good. What they do is help people get, like, if you have a lot of credit card debt, they can help you get a lower interest rate to pay it all off within a period of time. And you can, like, there's accreditations and they're nonprofits. And so you can kind of have a good sense of what's safe and what's a scam. But pretty much anyone who's saying that they can just like increase your credit, no strings attached, that's usually a scam. And usually what they do is just dispute everything on your credit report, and your credit score will come up for like a month while they investigate, and then they'll find out that you actually do owe it and you will have a bad credit score again. The most important things to do to keep a good credit score, to build a good credit score, 100% make on-time payments. Keep credit card balances low, only apply for loans you need, and just be patient. I think this is the hardest one, the bottom one. There are a few ways that you can start if you have never borrowed before or if you have a negative history. And so those are these two: secure credit cards and tracker loans. The reason you can get them if you have a bad history or no history is that they are very low risk for the lender. With a secure credit card or a secure loan, the borrower makes a deposit, and that deposit is held in case the borrower does not repay. After a certain period of time, they'll get that money back, but it's like a security deposit on an apartment, right? If you have issues, they're going to keep it. If you don't, you get it back. With a credit or with a tracker loan, sometimes called a credit builder loan, the money, instead of coming to you when you take out the loan, it goes into an escrow account. So an account that you can't access and also the financial institution doesn't access. And then when you pay off the loan, that's when you get the money. So again, if the borrower does not repay, the lender hasn't lost any money. These are both really good ways to start building some credit. The other way is, as you mentioned before, becoming an authorized user on a card. Authorized users are not responsible for the payments on the card. So that's how they're different than like a cosigner. A cosigner has full responsibility for the debt that they are on. An authorized user can be removed at any time. Cool. Yeah. What are our questions? These are questions that
You've already answered.
here. Yes, I think these were questions that were asked here. And yes, fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, great. So based on what we just talked about, do I need to keep a balance on my credit card? Is it good to keep a balance on your credit card? Yes, yes, no. Sure. Yeah, but that is good for your credit score, but you don't need to ever keep a balance on your card. As long as you're using it and it's open, you can pay it off constantly. You can pay it off every time you make a purchase. You can pay it off every day. You don't need to carry a balance over into the next month. Doing that will only end up charging you interest. Okay, will checking my credit score hurt it if I look on my own? No, it does not. When you apply for a loan, that is considered a hard pull or a hard inquiry, and it impacts your credit score. When you look on your own, a soft pull or a soft inquiry, totally fine. Does the amount of savings I have impact my credit score? No. If I've never taken out a loan before, do I have good credit? No. No credit is the same as bad credit. So I'm considering the best loan to be the lowest interest rate, right? And so I'm using the term here APR. APR stands for annual percentage rate. It is the total cost of the loan over a year. So the interest as well as any annual fees, startup fees, or points that you might pay. And so we talked about already, I should use the pointer. We talked about already having a higher credit score, right? That helps. Having a bigger down payment, that can help. And having a shorter term also helps. Again, from the perspective of a lender, if you have a loan for 5 years, that's 5 years when someone could miss a payment. If you have a loan for 3 years, it's fewer opportunities for someone to become delinquent. There is a fourth category here that I don't have because it is something you have no control over, and that is just what interest rates are. And that depends on how much the Federal Reserve is charging other banks to borrow money from them. And that's when you'll hear people say things like, oh, interest rates are good right now, or mortgage rates are good. That is something that isn't anything any of us can control. It's just, what's going on in the financial world. So the next slides here are examples of how term impacts a loan repayment. And this is someone who has like a good credit score, right? And we're saying $20,000, probably a car loan, right? And this version over 3 years, They go to the dealer and the dealer says, or the lender, and the lender says, great, you're going to pay $600 a month. And the person might say, wow, that is a lot of money. I cannot pay that. And so the lender might say, okay, no problem. Instead of 3 years, you can pay for 7 years. Interest rate bumps up, but your monthly payment is $322, right? Almost half of what it was before. And this might be a lot more affordable. However, when we get down to the end here, the interest that you end up paying over those additional years with that higher interest rate is about $5,000. And someone might say, you know what, actually it's worth $5,000 to me over 4 extra years to not have to pay $600 a month right now. And that's fair. It starts getting really bad when you end up in situations where you're already starting at a higher credit, at a higher interest rate. So for someone who might have a lower credit score, they might start out at 11.49, practically 0.5. Their monthly payment isn't that much higher than the original one, as 617 to 660. But overall, it's still a really big payment and it's a pretty good amount of interest. So if they pull their loan out to 7 years, 13%, $360, not too bad, but they paid over $10,000 in interest on an original loan of $20,000. So they've paid half of the total price again. And it is required by lenders to show you the total cost of the loan over time. So they have to give you this kind of information. But sometimes it's hard in a situation where you might be buying a car and you feel stuck, like especially for people who are at the dealership buying a car right then, where you might say, this is too expensive for me. And the lender or the dealer is working directly with the lender saying, well, we can pull it out, we can do these things to make it less for you monthly without telling you how much more it costs you over time. Ooh, 5 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna skip this guy. Let's talk about student loans. So federal student loans, private student loans. Private student loans is whatever the lender says. Sometimes they require a cosigner. The interest rate is going to depend usually on the credit score. The repayment terms are going to depend on the lender. They might require you to start paying immediately. They might require you to start paying after a certain period of time. And there's almost no options for repayment assistance or modifications. Federal student loans have a pretty low interest rate in general. There are lots of repayment plans, including income-driven ones. There are some options for loan forgiveness, but there is this borrowing limit. So there's only a certain amount of money you can borrow per year and also over your whole life. And so for some people, they'll hit that amount and then look towards private student loans to fill in the gap of their need. No, those are still through the Department of Education. There's 2 main distinctions with federal student loans. There's subsidized and unsubsidized. The subsidized ones have a lower cap, right? But they are, in my opinion, better. You're not responsible for the interest. Technically, the government pays the interest while you're in college, which is awesome. So you take out a loan for $1,000 as a freshman. When you leave school, it is still only $1,000. With unsubsidized student loans, it is not $1,000. It is $1,000 plus the interest that has accumulated over the period of time that has passed since you took out the loan. And what's really hard about that is that it becomes, okay, so it's this process called amortization. So the amount is amortized, and that means that the interest is added to the principal and it becomes a new principal. So let's say it started out as $1,000. You, got $200 of interest over the years it took you to graduate. Instead of leaving with $1,000 as principal, $200 as interest, it is $1,200 of principal, and that whole $1,200 will now be earning interest. So if you take out unsubsidized student loans, and it is at all possible for you, try to pay the interest while you're still in school so that you do not have to deal with that amortization when you graduate. Quick things about debt repayment. I'm just going to say, never pay the minimum on your credit card. Always pay as much as you can. Try not to carry a balance on a credit card that you cannot pay off in time. Credit cards have insanely high interest rates. They can be a wonderful tool for building credit, and they can be fun because you earn points and rewards and extra money back. But if you are only paying the minimum, you can end up in situations where you pay a ton of interest, and it can get very hard to get out of because the amount that's being charged in interest is getting added back into that. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if we're talking about student loans, it's usually going to be getting onto an income-driven repayment plan. The new like save, what's the word that I'm looking for? The way that the save plan is run is really awesome. And if your minimum payment doesn't cover the interest that would be charged, they don't charge you interest. Your minimum payment might be zero. I think it's really reasonable and realistic. If they are other types of loans, like a car loan, say, it can be more difficult. My recommendation is always to talk to your servicer first thing and say, hey, I am in the situation where I can't really afford these payments right now. Is there anything you can do to help me? Sometimes servicers can let you skip a month, or you might be able to do a modification to your loan where you're making a smaller payment for a period of time. You will, in the end, have to pay that back. It goes to the end of your loan, but it can give you some short-term assistance. Or they might talk to you about ways you could, surrender your vehicle, but have the least cost and least effect on your credit score. Because, okay, if you don't pay your debts, it's really bad. You get charged late fees. It goes onto your credit report. They take your property if it was property owned by them, and then continue to charge you for it. Cool. I can stay and answer some more questions though, if anyone needs. I don't know how long there is in between sections, but yeah. The other thing I would say is if the debt that to answer your question from before, if the debt in question is credit card debt, there are these credit counseling companies that can help with that. The other thing you can always do, so you can do a couple things. And what's difficult is that sometimes what makes the best financial sense in terms of saving you money does not have the best credit impact. So for someone who is really, really struggling and has a lot of credit card debt, they should just stop paying their credit cards. The only thing that a credit card company can do is like send you mean letters and call you and ask you for the money back and send it to the credit reports. So it'll tank your credit score for a while. And then, no, so sort of, it will. Okay, so let's say you stop paying your credit card, right? You stop today. Yes, 7 years from now, it's not even going to be on your credit report. They can sue you. In Vermont, the statute of limitation is 6 years. And typically they're not going to sue for anything like less than $600 because it's small claims and it's more expensive for them to do it than the money that they'd get back. If your income is low enough, they may not be able to take any money back from you, even if they sue you. And that's kind of like the worst thing that can happen. The other thing, and if you have a debt that is older, you can negotiate a settlement on it. So let's say you had a car that was $1,000. By the time it gets so at a certain point, the original lender will sell it to a collection company, and that collection company will be the one who calls you. That collection company buys it for much less than it's worth. But by that time, your $1,000 card is now probably $1,800. And you can call them and say, hey, look, I can't pay $1,800, but I could pay $1,000 right now. Will you settle this for that amount of money? And you can pay it off and it's done and it's cool. Yes. And so one of two things happens. Either they send it, they tell the credit bureau that they don't need to report it anymore and it gets deleted, or it gets reported as settled, paid for less than the full balance, which has less of a positive impact on your credit score than if you paid the full balance. But, you know, how much is it worth? I usually say like it's worth like $50, maybe $100. But if you're saving $600 or $1,000, like, you know, the other thing is always bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is, I think, talked about in a way in our media that is like really inaccurate, where, you know, someone says like, oh, I can't possibly go out for dinner, I'll go bankrupt. Bankruptcy is not something that happens to you. It is a legal process that you choose to go through, where you go to court and go through all of your debts and your assets and your income and come up with a plan that you can repay the money back within 5 years. Or if you don't have income, your assets get liquidated and all of your debt is discharged. There are exemptions for assets. So like if you have 2 cars, they're probably going to sell one of them. If you have 1 car, they're not going to sell that. They're not going to like go through your apartment and look at all of your clothes and say, oh, this is worth some money, right? They're going to look at major assets. And for a lot of people, the most common form of bankruptcy in the US is called zero asset bankruptcy, because everything that someone had was exempt. And this is just a way for them to start over. Bankruptcy does hurt your credit report for 7 to 10 years, depending on the type that you file. But you can still get a loan within 6 months or 2 years, depending on the type of loan, right? Like a credit card in 6 months, like a home loan in 2 years. Cool. Okay. So it's not the worst thing that can happen to someone. And especially, you know, I've worked with people who have like $50,000 of credit card debt and they have no way that they can pay it back. And instead of struggling to pay that back for 10 years, if they filed bankruptcy, they would be able to start again and be in a better moving forward position. Yeah. You can do balance transfer. Yeah. So that's called a balance transfer. Balance transfer cards have a fee to put the money on them, but there's 0% interest for a certain period of time. So yeah, it can buy you time. You have to have the income and the credit score to get it though. Because one thing that lenders look at is your ability to repay. They're not just looking at your credit score. They're not going to give a loan to someone who can't repay them, right? So yeah, but good point. Yeah.